I never thought a tiny propeller spinning in the wrong direction would change my entire life. But that's exactly how it started, with a broken motor, a cloudless Saturday in Austin, Texas, and a stranger whose laugh sounded like it belonged in a cathedral. My name is Ethan Clark. I was 23 years old, 132 pounds soaking wet, and the proud owner of opinions I never earned. I grew up in Westlake Hills, which, if you don't know Austin, is the part of town where the lawns are greener than the money is old. My father was a patent attorney. My mother chaired fundraisers for diseases she couldn't pronounce. And I was the only son, the heir to absolutely nothing interesting, except a trust fund and a collection of balsa wood airplanes that I loved more than most people. Aeromodeling, that was my thing. While other guys my age were at bars or swiping through dating apps, I was in my garage with a magnifying visor strapped to my face, gluing ribs onto a fuselage the width of my pinky finger. People thought it was weird. My college roommate once told me I had the hobbies of a 70-year-old widower. I didn't argue, he wasn't wrong. But there was something about building a plane from nothing, from plans and wood and patience, that made me feel like I actually existed, like I was doing something real, something precise, something that mattered even if only to me. When a plane I built caught the wind and climbed, really climbed, not wobbled but soared, I swear I could feel the string between my chest and the sky pull tight. And for those few seconds, I wasn't the skinny rich kid who couldn't bench press his own body weight. I was someone who made something fly. The other thing about me, the thing I never talked about, the thing I buried deep I almost convinced myself it wasn't there, was a question. A stupid, terrifying, relentless question that had been sitting in my stomach like a swallowed coin since I was maybe 15. I told myself it was curiosity. Just curiosity, everyone's curious, right? That doesn't mean anything. I dated girls. Well, I took girls to dinner. I kissed a few. Once in college, I slept with a girl named Caroline who smelled like vanilla. And cried afterward, not because of anything I did, but because she said she missed her dog back home. I held her and thought, this is fine. This is what people do. But sometimes at the field, the RC flying field on the east side of town where a dozen of us would gather on weekends, I'd catch myself watching the wrong person. Not the planes, not the girls who occasionally came along, the guys. The way a forearm flexed when someone adjusted a transmitter. The way someone's jaw moved when they concentrated. I hated myself for it. I told myself it was admiration, athletic admiration, aesthetic appreciation. Anything but the word I couldn't say. I came from a house where that word wasn't spoken. Not because anyone was cruel about it, not exactly. It was more like a silence. A conspicuous, heavy, suffocating silence. The kind that tells you everything you need to know without a single syllable. My father once changed the channel when two men kissed on a TV show, and he didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The click of the remote was a full sentence, so I buried it deep. And I built my little planes, and I played Puccini on my Bluetooth speaker, while I sanded wingtips, and I pretended the ache in me was something else. Before we continue, if you believe that love can still find us in the most unexpected places and want to help keep stories like these alive, you can support The Simple Gay Love on Patreon. Now, back to the story. The morning I met him was the first Saturday in October. The Texas heat had finally cracked, and the sky was that particular shade of blue that makes you want to lie down in the grass and never get up. I had my Cessna 182 replica, a quarter-scale beauty I'd spent 4 months building, loaded in the back of my Audi, and I drove out to the field with Rossini's La Gazza Ladra, blasting through my speakers because that overture always made me feel like the main character in a movie I hadn't written yet. The field was mostly empty when I arrived. Just old Gary with his ancient P-51 Mustang that he'd been flying since before I was born, and a couple of teenagers with foam drones that buzzed like angry bees. I set up my station, assembled the wings, checked my frequencies, and was just about to taxi onto the strip when I heard it. A voice behind me, deep and warm, with an accent I couldn't place. That is a beautiful aircraft. I turned around and I had to look up. Way up, he was tall. Not just tall, towering. 6'4" at least, maybe more. Broad shoulders, arms that looked like they'd been carved from some Nordic oak. His hair was the color of wheat just before harvest, pushed back from his forehead in a way that seemed effortless, but probably wasn't. His eyes were the kind of blue that doesn't exist in Texas. The blue of glaciers, of deep winter skies, of something ancient and far away. He was holding a transmitter in one hand and a plane in the other. A Spitfire, beautifully painted in RAV colors, with a level of detail that told me immediately this was not a beginner. "Thanks," I said, and my voice came out thinner than I wanted it to. He knelt down next to my Cessna and I noticed his hands. They were enormous but precise, The kind of hands that could crush a walnut or paint a brushstroke with equal ease. He pointed to the engine cowling. You did the panel lines by hand, drafting pen and a ruler. He looked up at me with something I can only describe as delight. Pure, unfiltered delight, the kind I hadn't seen on an adult's face in years. I am Magnus, he said, and he extended his hand. Ethan. His handshake was firm but not aggressive. His palm was warm. Magnus Lindgren, he continued, standing back to his full height. I moved here from Norway 3 months ago. Tromsø, in the north. Do you know it? I didn't, but I nodded because I didn't want to seem ignorant. I came here for the sun, he said, and he tilted his face toward the sky and closed his eyes for a moment, and I watched the light catch the fine blonde stubble on his jaw, and something inside me did a thing I was not prepared for. It dropped. Like a plane that loses its signal mid-flight, my stomach just fell. I turned back to my Cessna very quickly. The sun is pretty good here, I managed, he laughed. That was the laugh I mentioned, the one that sounded like it belonged in a cathedral. It was deep and full and echoed across the empty field, and old Gary looked over at us with mild curiosity before going back to his Mustang. Magnus set up his Spitfire next to my station, and we flew together that morning. His flying was extraordinary, precise, aggressive, theatrical. He did rolls and loops and stall turns that made the little Spitfire look like it was performing ballet. I flew my Cessna in careful, conservative circuits and tried not to stare at him. At one point, his Spitfire came in low over the strip, and the engine coughed and died mid-approach. He brought it in dead stick, no power, and landed it so softly on the grass that it barely left a mark. He pumped his fist like a kid who just scored a goal. Perfect landing, he shouted to no one in particular. I couldn't help it. I smiled. We packed up around noon and he asked if I knew a good place for coffee. I told him about a cafe on South Congress, and somehow, I still don't know how, we ended up sitting across from each other at a tiny table, our transmitters and toolboxes piled by the door, talking for 3 hours. He told me about Tromsø, about the polar nights, months of darkness when the sun never rises, about the northern lights, which he described so vividly I could almost see them reflected in his eyes. He said he loved his country, but the darkness made him feel like he was slowly disappearing, like the world was forgetting he existed. I needed light, he said simply, so I found the brightest place I could afford. He was 24. He worked as a carpenter, a real one, not the Instagram kind, building custom furniture for a shop in East Austin. He'd learned the trade from his grandfather in a workshop that overlooked a fjord, and he spoke about wood the same way I spoke about balsa, with reverence, with intimacy, like it was a living thing that deserved respect. And then, this was the moment, he said something that made my heart do that dropping thing again. You know what I was listening to while I painted the Spitfire last night? Verdi, La Traviata. The aria where Violetta realizes she is dying, but she sings about love anyway. Do you know it? I knew it. I knew it so well I could have hummed every note. La Traviata was the first opera I ever listened to, on a rainy afternoon when I was 16, alone in my room, and something in Violetta's voice made me cry so hard I scared myself. I know it, I said. His face lit up.
You like opera?
Italian opera, specifically Verdi, Puccini, Bellini, Donizetti. I've been listening since I was a teenager. He leaned forward across the table. My dream, he said, my absolute dream is to sit inside La Scala in Milan and hear Tosca performed live, to feel the music in the walls, in the floor, in my chest. Can you imagine? I could imagine. I could imagine it so clearly it hurt. Mine too, I whispered. Or the Palais Garnier in Paris, somewhere old. Somewhere where the music has soaked into the stone. He stared at me, and there was a silence between us that was nothing like the silence in my parents' house. This silence was warm. It was the silence of recognition, of two radio frequencies accidentally finding the same channel. Ethan, he said, and my name in his accent sounded like something valuable, like a word in a language I wanted to learn. I think we are going to be very good friends. We were. We became inseparable in a way that terrified me. Every Saturday at the field, every Sunday at the cafe. Wednesday evenings in his tiny apartment in East Austin, where he had a workbench that smelled like cedar, and a record player that only played vinyl, scratchy, imperfect, warm vinyl, and a collection of Italian opera recordings that rivaled mine. We'd build planes side by side. He was working on a Fokker Dr. I triplane, a Red Baron replica, and his craftsmanship was otherworldly. His hands moved with a patience and a tenderness that made me feel like I was watching something sacred, like a monk illuminating a manuscript. I'd glance over at him, and he'd be holding a tiny strut up to the light, turning it slowly, checking for imperfections, and the concentration on his face would make my breath catch. I should tell you, because it matters, because it changed everything, that Magnus was gay. Openly, calmly, completely gay. He told me during our second coffee, casually, the way you might mention you're left-handed. My last boyfriend, he said. He was a cellist in Bergen, beautiful hands, terrible temper. We broke up because he said I loved my planes more than him. He smiled when he said it, and I laughed, and inside I was having a full cardiac event. He was gay. He said it like it was nothing, like the world wouldn't end, like the sky wouldn't fall. I felt something crack inside me. Not break, but crack the way ice cracks when the spring melt begins. A fissure. A tiny, terrifying opening. I said nothing. I laughed at the boyfriend joke and changed the subject to wing profiles, and that night I went home and sat in my garage with the lights off for 45 minutes, not building anything. Just sitting there with Puccini's Nessun Dorma, playing on my phone, trying to breathe. The weeks turned into months. October became November. November became December. And Texas did that thing where it pretends winter exists for about 3 weeks before going back to being Texas. Magnus and I had developed a rhythm. He'd come over on Wednesdays with Takeout. He was obsessed with Tex-Mex, something that didn't exist in Tromsø. And we'd eat while listening to opera and working on our planes. We had a running debate about whether Verdi was greater than Puccini. He was a Verdi man, all drama and grandeur and political fire. I was Puccini, all heartbreak and melody and devastating beauty. We argued about it the way scholars argue about theology, with passion and respect and no expectation of resolution. He started teaching me Norwegian words. Fly was the same in Norwegian and English. It means to fly or simply airplane. He taught me ven, which means friend. He taught me vacker, which means beautiful. And when he said it, looking at a sunset from the field, I felt the words settle into my bones like a note that's been held too long. I started teaching him Texas things. How to say y'all without sounding like a parody. How to order barbecue properly. How to nod at a stranger on the street. The particular minimal Texan nod that means, I acknowledge your existence and I mean you no harm. He loved it. He practiced it on strangers and reported back to me with glee. I nodded at a man at the gas station today, he told me one Wednesday. He nodded back. I felt so American. I laughed so hard I knocked over my bottle of wood glue. But beneath the laughter, beneath the easy friendship and the shared music and the planes, something was growing. Something I could feel in the room like humidity. Invisible but undeniable, making everything slightly heavier, slightly harder to breathe through. I caught myself studying him. Not the way I studied a blueprint, clinically, analytically. This was something else. I memorized the way his hair fell when he leaned over his workbench, the way his t-shirt stretched across his shoulders, the small scar on his left hand where he'd cut himself on a chisel at 14, the way he hummed, always humming, always opera, always slightly off-key while he worked. And sometimes when he looked up and caught me watching, he'd smile. Not a big smile, a quiet one. Like he knew something I hadn't figured out yet. Hey everyone, I need to pause here for just a second. While we're in the middle of this story, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're listening from right now. Are you in New York, Sao Paulo, London, Lagos? Wherever you are, I want to know. Let me see those comments fill up. All right, let's get back to Ethan and Magnus. Christmas Eve, that was when the crack became a fracture. Magnus had no family in the States. His parents were in Tromsø, his sister in Oslo. He'd planned to spend Christmas alone, which I found physically offensive. I invited him to my parents' house. This was, in retrospect, either the bravest or the stupidest thing I had ever done. My parents were, how do I say this, polished. My mother set a table that could have been photographed for a magazine. My father wore a blazer to breakfast. They were kind in the way that expensive people are kind, generously, graciously, with the understanding that their kindness was a gift being bestowed, not a natural human function. Magnus arrived in a button-down shirt that was slightly too tight across his chest, carrying a bottle of aquavit and a loaf of bread he'd baked himself. Yes, baked from scratch. A traditional Norwegian julekake, studded with cardamom and raisins and glazed with something that smelled like heaven. My mother received it with the same expression she uses when receiving a gift she doesn't understand. A wide smile and a slight tilt of the head like a bird examining an unfamiliar seed. How artisanal, she said. Dinner was roasted duck and conversation about things that didn't matter. My father asked Magnus about the furniture business, in the same tone he might use to ask about weather in a country he'd never visit. My mother asked if he missed the snow. Magnus answered everything with warmth and patience, and I watched him navigate my family the way he navigated a dead stick landing, with calm precision and quiet skill. After dinner, my father put on a Sinatra record, and my mother started on plates, and Magnus and I ended up on the back porch with glasses of the aquavit. The night was cool, not cold, Texas cool. which is nothing compared to Norwegian cold, and the stars were visible for once, past the light pollution of the city. Your parents are lovely, Magnus said, and I could hear the generosity in the statement. They're a lot, I said. All parents are a lot. Mine once tried to set me up with a girl from church even after I told them I was gay. 3 times, the same girl. I laughed, but it came out wrong, tight, strangled. He looked at me. Ethan, yeah. Are you all right? I'm fine, you always say that. I'm fine. Every time I mention anything about being gay, you say I'm fine like you are trying to convince someone. My heart was pounding. I could feel it in my temples, in my wrists, behind my eyes. It doesn't bother me that you're gay. I want you to know that. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said very gently, I know it doesn't bother you, but something does. The stars blurred. I blinked hard, and they came back into focus, and I took a long drink of aquavit, which burned my throat in a way that was almost comforting. Magnus, I can't, you don't have to say anything, he said. Not tonight, not ever if you don't want to. I just want you to know that whatever it is, it's safe with me. He put his hand on my shoulder, just his hand, just resting there, warm and heavy and steady, and I felt the weight of it like an anchor, like the only thing keeping me from floating away into the dark sky. We sat like that for a long time. The Sinatra record drifted through the screen door, something about flying to the moon. And I thought about all the planes I'd built, all the things I'd sent into the air, and how I'd never once had the courage to launch myself. January came, and with it a shift. I started going to Magnus's apartment more often. Not just Wednesdays, Tuesdays, sometimes Fridays, occasionally a random Monday when the loneliness hit like a wave and I couldn't stand my own empty house. He never questioned it. He'd open the door, hand me a cup of coffee, Norwegian coffee, black and strong enough to strip paint, and we'd fall into our rhythm. Building, listening, talking, but the talking changed. It got deeper. The way rivers get deeper the farther you travel from their source. He told me about the first boy he ever kissed, a classmate named Eric, in a storage room behind the school gymnasium. Both of them 15, both of them terrified, both of them smiling. It was terrible, he said. Our teeth hit. My nose was running because it was -10 outside. But when it happened, when his lips touched mine, I felt, how do you say it? I felt like the world had been lying to me. And now it was finally telling the truth. I was sanding a wing rib when he said this. My hand stopped moving. Were you scared? I asked. Every day for years. But the fear was smaller than the truth. The truth was enormous, Ethan. It was the biggest thing in my life. Trying to keep it small, that was what hurt. I went back to sanding, the rhythm of the sandpaper on balsa, the scratch and whisper of it. I focused on that sound like it was the only thing in the universe. Have you ever kissed anyone and felt that? He asked. Like the world was finally telling the truth? No, I said. And it was the most honest thing I'd said in years. February. Valentine's Day, because of course. I was alone in my garage working on a new build, a de Havilland Mosquito, twin-engine, all-wood construction, the most ambitious project I'd ever attempted. I had Puccini's Madama Butterfly playing, the love duet from Act 1, Viena la Sera, where Pinkerton and Butterfly sing about the night falling and the stars coming out, and their voices intertwine like vines growing toward the same light. My phone buzzed, a text from Magnus. Happy Valentine's Day, airplane boy. I am eating pizza alone and listening to Rigoletto. What about you? I typed back, building a mosquito, listening to Butterfly. Butterfly, perfect for Valentine's. The most heartbreaking love story ever composed. That's what makes it perfect. A pause. 3 dots appearing and disappearing. Then, do you ever feel like Butterfly? Waiting for someone who might never come. I stared at my phone. The screen glowed in the dim garage. Puccini swelled. Butterfly and Pinkerton sang about a night that would end too soon. And I felt that swallowed coin in my stomach turn over and over and over. I typed, sometimes, he replied. Me too, then. But sometimes the person you're waiting for is already there. You just haven't turned around yet. I put my phone down. I put my hands on the workbench and gripped the edge until my knuckles went white. I could feel the wood grain pressing into my palms, real and solid and present. And Butterfly was singing about love. And I was 23 years old and so afraid of myself that I couldn't breathe. I picked up the phone again. I typed 4 words, then deleted them. Typed them again. Deleted them. Typed them a 3rd time. And before I could delete them again, my thumb hit send. Can I come over? His reply was instant. I drove across town in 17 minutes. I parked crookedly. I walked up the stairs to his 2nd-floor apartment and found the door, as promised, open. He was on the couch in sweatpants and a t-shirt that had a hole near the collar. And there was a pizza box on the coffee table and Rigoletto playing from the record player. And the room smelled like cedar and tomato sauce and warmth. He looked up at me and smiled, and it was the quiet smile, the one that said he knew something I didn't. "Hi," he said. "Hi." I stood in the doorway like an idiot, like a plane on the taxiway with the engine running but no one at the controls. "Are you going to come in?" I stepped inside. I closed the door behind me. The click of the latch sounded very loud. I sat on the opposite end of the couch. He offered me pizza. I took a slice and didn't eat it. Rigoletto moved into the famous quartet, 4 voices, 4 truths, all singing at the same time, all different, all tangled together in something too complex to separate. "Magnus, yes, I think I need to tell you something." He didn't move. He didn't lean forward or back. He just looked at me with those glacier eyes, and in them I saw something I hadn't expected. Patience. Infinite, gentle, endless patience. My voice broke. Actually broke, like a 15-year-old's, like a string pulled too tight. I don't know how to, and then I was crying. Not gracefully. Not like in movies where a single tear slides down a cheekbone. I was ugly crying, my face in my hands, my shoulders shaking, my breath coming in hiccups, and I hadn't cried like that since I was 7 years old and my dog died. And the sound coming out of me was something I didn't recognize, something that had been locked in a basement for a decade and was finally breaking through the door. Magnus didn't say a word. He moved across the couch slowly, like approaching a wounded bird, and he put his arm around me. Not tight, not pulling me toward him. Just there, a presence, a wall I could lean against if I chose to. I leaned into him, my face against his chest, and I felt his heartbeat under my cheek. Steady, strong, calm. And I cried until there was nothing left. Until I was empty and hollowed out and strangely, impossibly light. When I finally pulled back, my face was a disaster. He handed me a napkin from the pizza box, which was so absurd it made me laugh, and the laugh and the cry got tangled together, and I made a sound that was somewhere between joy and grief. "Sorry," I said. "Don't apologize. I got your shirt wet. It already had a hole in it." I looked at him. His face was open and kind and steady, and I thought about all the planes I'd built, all the hours of precision and patience and care, and I realized that this moment, this terrifying, devastating, beautiful moment, required the same thing. Precision, patience, care. "I think I'm gay," I said. The words hung in the air like a model plane that's just left the launcher, aloft but uncertain, not yet flying, not yet falling, suspended in that breathless instant before physics decides its fate. Magnus nodded slowly. "I know," he said. "You know, Ethan. You play Puccini love duets alone in your garage on Valentine's Day. You look at me when you think I'm not watching, and you blush every time I mention an ex-boyfriend. I do not blush. You are blushing right now." I was. I could feel it, heat rushing to my face like a tide. He reached over and took my hand, not dramatically, not like a grand gesture in an opera, just simply plainly, the way you'd pick up a tool you needed. He laced his fingers through mine, and his hand was warm and rough from the carpentry and twice the size of mine, and I looked down at our hands together, his broad and tan, mine pale and bony, and something inside me settled, like a plane that finds its trim, that perfect balance point where the nose doesn't pitch up or down, where everything is level and smooth and right. "This doesn't have to be anything you're not ready for," he said. "We can sit here. We can eat pizza. We can listen to Verdi argue with Puccini. And tomorrow you can decide what this means. What if I don't know what it means? Then you don't know, and that's fine. Not knowing is not a crime, Ethan. It's just a beginning." Rigoletto ended. The record player clicked and hissed in the run-out groove, and neither of us moved to change it. We sat there, hand in hand, in the small apartment that smelled like cedar, and the silence between us was the warmest thing I had ever felt. I didn't kiss him that night. I want you to know that. I didn't kiss him, and he didn't kiss me. And nothing happened except the most important thing that had ever happened to me. I went home at midnight. I drove with the windows down, even though it was February and the air had teeth. I played Nessun Dorma at full volume. Pavarotti, because when you've just cracked yourself open, only Pavarotti will do. And when he hit the high B, I screamed along with him out the open window, into the dark Texas night, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was pretending. Nessun Dorma. None shall sleep, and that night I didn't. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and replayed every moment, his arm around me, his heartbeat, his hand in mine. The way he said "I know," not with smugness, not with pity, but with recognition. The way you say "I know" when someone finally admits they love a piece of music you've loved for years. My phone buzzed at 2 a.m. "Magnus, are you sleeping? Me Nessun Dorma." "Magnus, ha. Me neither. I keep thinking about what you said. Me. Are you disappointed that it took me so long?" "Magnus, Ethan. A Fokker triplane takes 6 months to build. The good things always take time." I smiled in the dark. I smiled so wide my face hurt. "Me. Good night, Magnus. Magnus, good night, airplane boy." Sweet dreams about Puccini, me always Puccini, Magnus wrong. Verdi. We're not having this fight at 2 a.m. Magnus, we're absolutely having this fight at 2 a.m. Verdi had more range. Me, Puccini had more heart. Magnus, Verdi composed Otello at 74 years old. 74. Your Puccini could never. Me, Puccini wrote La Bohème. End of argument. Magnus, La Bohème is magnificent, I admit this. But Ida. Me, but Tosca. Me, but Turandot. Magnus, Turandot is extraordinary. Me, thank you, Magnus. Verdi is still better. Me, good night, Magnus. Magnus, good night. For real this time. A pause. Then one more message, Magnus. I'm glad you came over tonight. Me too, and I was. God, I was. March changed everything. I started touching him. Not in any grand way, small things. My hand on his back when I passed behind him in the workshop. My knee against his under the table at the cafe. My fingers brushing his when I handed him a tool. Each touch was a test. A tiny, controlled experiment, like adjusting the elevator trim on a plane by 1 degree and seeing if it holds. And each time the plane held. Each time he didn't flinch or pull away or look at me with anything other than that warm, patient, knowing smile. He was letting me set the pace. I realized that later. He was letting me come to him the way you let a nervous animal approach. No sudden movements, no pressure. Just stillness and openness in the quiet message. I'm here whenever you're ready. One Wednesday in late March, we were in his apartment working on our planes. He was fitting the upper wing on his Fokker triplane, and I was sheeting the Mosquito's fuselage, and Tosca was playing. The second act, the scene where Tosca confronts Scarpia, all fire and fury and impossible courage. Magnus, I said, have you ever been to La Scala or the Palais Garnier? Or any of the great opera houses? He shook his head. No, I've only heard recordings. And once a small production in Bergen, in a theater that smelled like fish. It was Figaro. The tenor was drunk. It was wonderful. Let's go, I said. Someday let's go to Italy or France. Let's sit in one of those old theaters and hear it live. He put down his triplane and looked at me. You mean that? I've never meant anything more. Together? That word. Together. It fell between us like a stone into a still pond, and the ripples spread out in every direction. Together, I said. He stood up. He walked over to me. He was so tall that I had to crane my neck to look up at him, and he was looking down at me with those blue eyes, and the room smelled like cedar and balsa, and the faint sweetness of drying glue, and Tosca was singing Visi Dart. I lived for art, I lived for love, and I thought, this is it. This is the moment when the plane either flies or crashes. He raised his hand slowly and touched my face. Just his fingertips along my jaw, the lightest touch barely there, like the brush of a wingtip against a cloud. Can I? He whispered. I nodded. He leaned down and he kissed me. It was nothing like kissing Caroline, who smelled like vanilla and cried about her dog. It was nothing like any kiss I'd imagined, and I had imagined many, late at night, in the dark, hating myself for everyone. It was soft, it was warm. His lips tasted like coffee and something sweet I couldn't name. His hand cradled my jaw like it was something fragile, something he'd spent months building, and I felt like the world had been lying to me, and now it was finally telling the truth. The truth was enormous. Magnus was right. The truth was the biggest thing in my life, and trying to keep it small had been the thing that hurt. When we pulled apart, I was shaking, not from fear, from release. From the sudden absence of a weight I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it wasn't part of my body. How was that? He asked. I laughed, a real laugh. A laugh that came from a place inside me that hadn't been touched in years. A room I'd locked and boarded up, and now finally thrown open. That, I said, was better than Puccini. He grinned. Better than Verdi too. Now you're pushing it. He kissed me again, and this time I kissed him back. That night after he walked me to my car, after I drove home with the windows down and Pavarotti soaring and the world looking brand new, I sat in my garage and I looked at my planes. All of them, the Cessna, the half-finished Mosquito, the little Piper Cub I'd built when I was 17. They hung from the ceiling on fishing line, suspended in permanent flight, and I thought about how many hours I'd spent in this room, alone. Building things that flew so I could feel something close to freedom. I picked up my phone. Me, Magnus, yes, airplane boy. Me, I want to go to Italy with you. I want to sit in La Scala and hear Tosca. I want to feel the music in the walls. And I want to be next to you when it happens. A long pause, longer than usual. I watched the 3 dots appear and disappear, appear and disappear. Then Magnus. I have been waiting to hear that since the first day at the field. When you stood there with your Cessna and your Rossini and your sad, beautiful eyes, and I thought, there is a man who is building the wrong things. He builds planes when what he needs to build is a door. A door out of whatever room he has locked himself in. I read it twice, 3 times. Me, and now Magnus. Now the door is open, and I am standing on the other side. And I am not going anywhere. I put my phone down. I looked up at my planes hanging from the ceiling, caught in their eternal motionless flight. And for the first time I wanted something more than flight. I wanted landing. I wanted arrival. I wanted the place where you stop running and finally, stand still. I wanted him. The weeks after that first kiss were like learning a new language. Not Norwegian, though Magnus kept teaching me that too, but a language I didn't have a name for. The language of being honest with yourself. The language of not flinching when someone looks at you and sees the thing you've been hiding. I was clumsy at it. Terribly, painfully clumsy. The first time Magnus reached for my hand in public, we were walking through a farmer's market on a Saturday morning. The sun already brutal even in early April. I pulled away like I'd touched a hot engine block. It was reflex. Pure, trained, automatic reflex. The same way you yank your hand back from a flame before your brain even registers the heat. He didn't say anything. He just kept walking, kept talking about the tomatoes he wanted to buy, kept being Magnus, steady, warm, unhurt. Or at least performing unhurt so convincingly that I almost believed it. I caught up to him by the peach stand. I stood close, I let my arm press against his. And after a minute, when my heartbeat had settled and the panic had crawled back into whatever hole it lived in, I reached down and took his hand. He looked at me, that quiet smile. "There you are," he said. "Sorry. I'm working on it. I know you are." His thumb traced a circle on the back of my hand, slow and deliberate, and a woman selling honey at the next stand glanced at us and then looked away, and the world did not end. The sky did not fall. Nobody pointed, nobody whispered, nobody called my father. A man in a cowboy hat nodded at us, the Texan nod, the one I'd taught Magnus, and Magnus nodded back, and I felt something shift in my chest, like a gear finally catching after months of grinding. This was possible. This was actually possible. But the inside work, the real work, was harder. I'd wake up some mornings and feel fine, better than fine. I'd make coffee and play Puccini and think about Magnus's hands and smile at the ceiling like a fool. Those mornings felt like the first warm day after a long winter. When you step outside and the air doesn't bite, and you realize you'd forgotten what kindness felt like. And then other mornings I'd wake up, and the old voice would be there. My father's voice, not his actual voice, but the voice of him. The accumulated silence of 23 years, the click of the remote, the careful avoidance, the blazer at breakfast, and the life that looked perfect from the outside, because perfection was the only acceptable option. On those mornings I'd lie in bed and think, what am I doing? Who do I think I am? This isn't me. This can't be me. I'm Ethan Clark from Westlake Hills, and Clark men don't do this, don't feel this, don't hold hands at farmers' markets with Norwegian carpenters who are 6 inches taller and infinitely braver. Magnus could always tell. He'd text me good morning, and if I didn't respond within 20 minutes, he'd call. Not to check on me, he was smarter than that. He'd call to argue about opera. Good morning. I have been thinking, and I have decided that Verdi's Requiem is the single greatest piece of music ever written by a human being, and I will accept no disagreement. And I'd laugh, despite the voice, despite the weight, despite the old fear sitting on my chest like a stone. I'd laugh because he was ridiculous and beautiful, and he knew exactly what he was doing. Verdi's Requiem is magnificent, I'd say, but Puccini's Cigelita Menina can make a grown man weep in under 4 minutes. Everything makes you weep, Ethan. You cried at a commercial for dog food last week. The dog was reunited with his owner after 3 years. That's objectively moving. You are the softest man in Texas. Don't tell anyone. Your secret is safe. All of them. And there it was, that gentleness, that quiet assurance, all of them. Every secret, every fear, every locked room inside me. Safe within April, I told someone. Not my parents. Not yet. I told my friend David, who I'd known since high school, who worked in tech, and had a beard that made him look like a lumberjack, and a heart that was bigger than his stock options. We were at a bar, a quiet one, not the loud kind, and I'd had 2 beers, which for me was practically drunk, and he was telling me about a girl he'd been seeing, and I interrupted him. David, yeah, I'm seeing someone. No way. Who? His name is Magnus. David stopped mid-sip. His beer hovered in front of his face like a frozen frame. I watched him process it, the pronoun, the name, the implication, and I braced myself for impact. He put his beer down. He looked at me. Is he cool? That was it. Is he cool? Not are you sure? Not since when? Not but you dated Caroline. Just is he cool? He's the coolest person I've ever met, I said. And my voice didn't even shake. Then I want to meet him. Bring him to poker night. He doesn't play poker. Neither do you. You're terrible at poker. At least he'll have an excuse. He's Norwegian. I laughed. David laughed. He raised his beer. To Magnus, he said. the Norwegian who somehow convinced the most uptight guy I know to relax for once in his life. We clinked glasses and I drank, and the beer tasted different than it had 5 minutes ago. It tasted like relief. Magnus came to poker night. He lost spectacularly and with great enthusiasm. He brought a bottle of aquavit that nobody liked except him. He told stories about growing up in Tromsø, about the time his grandfather's fishing boat got stuck in ice, and they had to wait 2 days for it to thaw. About the summer he spent building a kayak from scratch and paddling it through the fjords. About the northern lights on his 18th birthday, green and purple and white, rippling across the sky like God was shaking out a tablecloth. David's friends loved him. They asked him to say things in Norwegian and laughed at the sounds. They asked about Vikings and he told them, with a perfectly straight face, that his great-great-grandfather was a raider who once sacked a monastery in Scotland, and they believed him until he burst out laughing and said he made it up. On the drive home, Magnus put his hand on my knee. "Your friends are wonderful," he said. "They liked you, of course they liked me. I am very likable and humble, extremely humble. The most humble person in this car." I put my hand on top of his, our fingers interlaced. The highway stretched ahead, dark and empty, and the dashboard glowed soft blue, and I felt something I hadn't felt in so long I'd forgotten it existed. I felt normal, not despite this, because of this. Because my hand was in his and the world was still turning, and my friends had toasted a Norwegian carpenter named Magnus, and nothing was broken. Nothing was wrong. Everything for once was exactly where it was supposed to be. May brought the planes back. We'd been so consumed by the new territory of us, learning how to be together, how to navigate the world as two men who were more than friends, that we'd neglected our flying. The Fokker triplane sat unfinished on Magnus's workbench. My Mosquito was still half-sheeted. Our transmitters gathered dust. It was Magnus who brought us back. "Saturday," he announced one Wednesday evening while we were cooking dinner in his kitchen. He cooked, I supervised, which meant I sat on the counter and handed him things, and tried not to stare at the way his forearms moved when he chopped onions. Saturday we fly, no excuses. Saturday came and we went to the field. Old Gary was there as always. The teenagers with their foam drones were there, and a few new faces, a father and son with a yellow cub, a woman with a sleek jet that screamed like a banshee. Magnus had brought his Spitfire, the one I'd seen the first day. I had my Cessna. We set up side by side, the way we always did, and the old rhythm came back like muscle memory. Check the frequencies, assemble the wings, test the controls, taxi to the strip. We flew together, not just near each other, together. We found a pattern, a kind of aerial dialogue, where his Spitfire would climb and my Cessna would follow, or he'd loop and I'd fly under him, and we'd chase each other across the sky in lazy, beautiful arcs that nobody on the ground could have known were a conversation. But they were. Every maneuver was a sentence. Every near miss was a laugh. Every moment when our planes flew side by side, wingtip to wingtip, was the equivalent of walking hand in hand through a Saturday market with the sun on our faces. Old Gary wandered over at one point. "You two fly like you've been doing it together for years," he said. "We have," Magnus replied. "We just didn't know it yet." Gary nodded like that made perfect sense and went back to his Mustang. That evening, back at Magnus's apartment, I was sitting on the floor leaning against the couch, and he was behind me, his legs on either side of me, his hands working the tension out of my shoulders. I carry all my stress in my shoulders, always have. Years of hunching over workbenches, of making myself small, of pulling inward like a turtle retreating into its shell. Magnus's hands were extraordinary. They could build a chair, land a Spitfire, and reduce me to a boneless puddle of contentment in about 4 minutes. His thumbs pressed into the knots along my spine, and I groaned in a way that was deeply undignified and entirely involuntary. "You are made of knots," he said. "Your entire back is one large knot. It's been a tense 23 years. I believe this." His hands moved to the base of my neck, and I let my head fall forward, and Tosca was playing again. Always Tosca in this apartment, always that fierce, heartbroken woman singing about art and love and the cost of both. "Magnus, what does it feel like, to have been out for so long, to just be who you are?" His hands paused, not stopping, pausing, considering. "It feels," he said slowly, "like the moment a plane lifts off. You know that moment, when the wheels leave the ground and there is a second, just 1 second, where you are not on the earth, and you are not yet in the sky. You are in between, you are nowhere and everywhere. And then the air catches you, and you climb, and the ground gets small, and you realize, I am flying. I have always been able to fly." I was just standing on the ground. I reached back and found his hand and held it against my chest. My heart beat under his palm. "I want to fly," I said. He leaned down and kissed the top of my head, his lips in my hair. The simplest, smallest, most devastating gesture. You already are, he whispered. June. Summer in Texas, which means the air turns into soup, and the asphalt melts, and the only sensible thing to do is stay inside with the air conditioning on full blast and build model airplanes, which is exactly what we did. Magnus finished his Fokker triplane. It was a masterpiece. 3 crimson wings, authentic lozenge camouflage on the underside, a tiny iron cross on the tail that he'd hand-painted with a brush the size of an eyelash. He held it up to the light, turning it slowly, and his face had that expression I'd come to love. The expression of a man who has built something beautiful and knows it. Not with arrogance, but with gratitude. The way a parent looks at a child who's finally sleeping. She's ready, he said. She's incredible. I'm going to name her. You name your planes? Of course I name my planes. Every plane deserves a name, he thought for a moment. Bran, it means fire in Norwegian. Fire. For the Red Baron. And for other things. He looked at me. For the thing that burns in you when you finally stop being afraid. I looked at him across the workbench, this tall, golden, impossible man who'd walked into my life with a spitfire and a laugh and torn down every wall I'd ever built. And I thought about the word fire, and I thought about how some fires destroy and some fires illuminate, and the difference isn't the flame, it's what you pointed at. I love you, I said. The words came out before I could stop them, before I could filter them or soften them or redirect them into something safer, something less terrifying, something less true. They just fell out of me like a plane that's lost its lift, tumbling in free fall, and there was a moment, 1 second, maybe 2, where the air went very still and very heavy, and I wanted to take them back so badly my teeth hurt. Magnus put down the triplane. He walked around the workbench. He stopped in front of me, and he was so tall that I had to tip my head all the way back, and his eyes were so blue they looked like they'd been borrowed from a different sky. Say it again, he said. I love you, again. I love you, Magnus. He cradled my face in both his hands, those enormous, precise, gentle hands, and he tilted my face up and he kissed me, and it was not soft this time. It was not tentative or careful or exploratory. It was deep and full and certain, the way the final note of an aria is certain, the way a plane that's found its altitude is certain. And I put my arms around his neck and pulled him closer, and felt his heart hammering against my chest, and for the first time I realized that he had been afraid too. Not of himself, he'd made peace with himself years ago. He'd been afraid of this, of us, of loving someone who might not be brave enough to love him back. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathing hard. His forehead rested against mine. His eyes were closed. Jeg elsker deg, he said. That is Norwegian for I love you. And I have wanted to say it since the day you stood at that field with your Cessna and your sad eyes and your Rossini, and I thought, that is the most beautiful, most frightened man I have ever seen. I'm not frightened anymore. I know. He opened his eyes. That's why I can finally say it. July, I told my parents, not over the phone, not in a letter. In person, at their dining table on a Sunday afternoon, with the good china out and the air conditioning humming and my mother's roast chicken going cold on my plate. I'd rehearsed it 100 times. In the mirror, in the car, in Magnus's apartment with him sitting across from me, playing the role of my father, with an exaggerated American accent that was so terrible it made me laugh every time, which was the point. He wanted me laughing, not panicking. But when the moment came, there was no rehearsal. There was just me and them and the truth. Mom, Dad, I'm seeing someone and I want you to know about it. His name is Magnus. He's from Norway. He's a carpenter, and he builds model airplanes, and he loves opera, and he makes me happier than I've ever been. The silence that followed was the longest of my life. Longer than the silence in this house had ever been, and this was a house built on silence. My mother looked at my father. My father looked at his plate. The roast chicken sat there, glistening and golden and completely irrelevant. Then my mother said, "Is he the one who brought the bread? At Christmas? Yes. The cardamom bread. Yes." She was quiet for another moment. Then she said it was very good bread, and something in her voice, something small and uncertain and real, told me that she was trying, that this wasn't the reaction she'd rehearsed either, because she hadn't rehearsed anything, because she hadn't known, or maybe she had known, and hadn't let herself know, and now she was standing at the edge of something unfamiliar, and doing the only thing she could do, reaching for the nearest solid ground. The bread was solid ground. My father didn't look up for a long time. When he finally did, his face was the face of a man who was recalculating, like a GPS that's lost its signal and is trying to find a new route to a destination it never planned for. "Is he good to you?" he asked. "He's the best person I know." My father nodded, one nod, the Texan nod. Small, minimal, loaded with everything he couldn't say. It wasn't acceptance. Not yet, it was acknowledgement. It was the click of the remote in reverse, turning toward instead of away. It was a beginning, and beginnings, as Magnus had taught me, were enough. I drove to Magnus's apartment afterward. I walked through the door and he was there, standing in the kitchen, and one look at my face told him everything. How did it go? My mom complimented your bread. He blinked. My bread? The Jula cake from Christmas. She said it was very good. He stared at me, and then he started laughing. That cathedral laughed, the one that filled rooms and rattled windows and made everything feel sacred. And I started laughing too, and we stood there in his kitchen, laughing until we cried. Because sometimes the most important moments in your life hinge on cardamom bread, and that is ridiculous and perfect and exactly how the world works. August, the dream. We were at the cafe on South Congress, our cafe, the one where we'd had our first conversation 9 months ago, and Magnus had his laptop open, and he was looking at something with an intensity that usually meant either Verdi or trouble. Ethan, come look at this, I leaned over. On the screen was a website, the Teatro alla Scala, Milan, the season schedule, and there, highlighted in yellow, Tosca, Giacomo Puccini, October 15th through November 3rd. My heart stopped, actually, physically stopped, and then restarted with a thud I felt in my teeth. La Scala, I breathed. Tosca, he said, at La Scala, our opera, at our theater. We looked at each other across the tiny cafe table and the noise of South Congress, the traffic, the tourists, the guy playing guitar on the corner, faded to nothing, and it was just us and a screen showing the thing we dreamed about since before we knew each other. We should go, I said. We should absolutely go. Can we afford it? I have been saving. Since I came to Texas, I put money away every month. I told myself it was for emergencies, but really I think I was saving for this. For something I didn't have a name for yet. How much do you have? He told me a number. It wasn't a lot. It was a carpenter's savings, honest and modest and earned with hands and sweat. I told him a number too. My number was bigger, much bigger, trust fund bigger, and for the first time in my life I wasn't ashamed of it. Let me do this, I said. Let me buy the tickets, the flights, a hotel near La Scala. Let me do this one thing with the money I never earned, for the person who made me earn something much more important. He looked at me, and his eyes were bright, and he shook his head slowly. We split it, he said, everything, 50-50. We do this together, or we don't do it at all. Magnus, I have more money than I know what to do with. Let me, 50-50, Ethan. There was something in his voice, not pride, not stubbornness, but something deeper. Equality, partnership, the insistence that this thing between us was not a charity or a rescue, but a meeting of equals, two people standing on the same ground, building the same plane. 50-50, I agreed. He turned the laptop toward me. Then let's book it. We booked it. 2 tickets to Milan. 2 seats at La Scala Tosca on October 22nd. A small hotel in the Brera district, walking distance from the theater. 5 nights in Italy, Milan, then a day trip to Verona, then a train to Venice, because Magnus had never seen Venice, and I had never seen Venice, and some cities you should see for the first time with the person you love. When the confirmation email arrived, Magnus picked me up, literally lifted me off the ground, all 132 pounds of me, and spun me around in the cafe, and the barista looked at us like we were insane, and we absolutely were. September was the longest month of my life. Every day crawled. I counted the hours, the minutes, the seconds until October. I watched YouTube videos of La Scala productions. I listened to every recording of Tosca I could find. Callas, Tebaldi, Gheorghiu, Netrebko, comparing interpretations, dissecting phrasing, driving Magnus crazy with my analysis. You are overthinking this, he said one night, lying on his couch with my head on his chest while Visidart played for the 11th time that week. I'm not overthinking, I'm preparing. It's an opera, not a final exam. It's not just an opera, it's our opera. In our theater, in Italy. Everything has to be perfect. He ran his fingers through my hair, a gesture that had become as natural and essential as breathing, and said, "It will be perfect because we will be there. Together. That's all that matters. And the acoustics, and the acoustics, and the sets, and the sets. And whether the soprano, the high C, and Vici d'arte without going sharp, because some sopranos rush it and it ruins the entire." He kissed me to shut me up, which was an effective strategy and one he employed frequently. October 21st. The flight to Milan. I had never been to Europe. Magnus had, obviously. He was from there, but he'd never been to Italy. And on the plane he was like a child on Christmas morning, pressing his face to the window during the descent, pointing at the Alps, at the green patchwork of Lombardy, at the distant shimmer of the lakes. "Look," he kept saying. "Ethan, look." But mostly I looked at him looking, at the wonder on his face, at the way excitement made his accent thicker and his gestures bigger. And I thought about how strange and incredible it was that this man, this tall, strong, fearless man who'd crossed an ocean to chase the sun, could still be made breathless by a view from a window. Milan was overwhelming. The noise, the traffic, the Vespas weaving through intersections like suicidal wasps. Our hotel was small and old, with a wrought iron elevator that barely fit us both, and a room with a window that opened onto a courtyard where someone was playing piano. Actual piano, not a recording. Just someone practicing Chopin at 4 in the afternoon like this was the most normal thing in the world. We dropped our bags and walked. We walked through the Brera district, past galleries and bookshops and cafes, where people sat for hours over tiny cups of espresso. We walked to the Duomo and stood in the piazza and looked up at the cathedral, all those spires reaching for the sky like fingers trying to touch God. And Magnus put his arm around my shoulders and I put mine around his waist. And we stood there, two men from opposite ends of the earth, bound together by balsa wood and Puccini, looking up at something beautiful. That night we ate pasta at a tiny restaurant where the owner spoke no English and we spoke no Italian beyond opera lyrics. Magnus ordered by pointing at things on the menu, and everything that arrived was miraculous. We drank red wine that tasted like the earth itself had been liquefied and poured into a glass. "Tomorrow," Magnus said, lifting his glass. "Tomorrow we hear Tosca," I repeated. We clinked glasses. The wine glowed in the candlelight, dark and deep and red, and I looked at his face across the table. The sharp jaw, the glacier eyes, the smile that had saved my life. And I thought about the first day at the field, the broken motor, the cloudless sky, the voice behind me saying, "That is a beautiful aircraft." He'd been talking about the plane. I knew that, but sometimes I wondered. October 22nd, the day I woke up at 6. Magnus was still asleep, sprawled across the bed in that way of his, completely, shamelessly, taking up every available inch. His face was pressed into the pillow, and his hair was wild, and one arm hung off the edge of the mattress. And he was so beautiful I had to look away for a moment because looking directly at him felt like looking at the sun. I got up quietly. I went to the window and opened the shutters. The courtyard below was empty except for a cat sitting on a ledge, cleaning its paw with the kind of precision I recognized from the workbench. The sky was the color of pale silk, not quite blue, not quite white, a Milan sky softer than Texas. Behind me, Magnus stirred. "What time is it? Early, go back to sleep. Come back to bed." I turned. He was looking at me with one eye open, half smiling, his voice still thick with sleep. I crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed, and he reached for my hand and pulled me down beside him. And we lay there in the thin October light, face to face, close enough that I could count his eyelashes. "Are you nervous?" he asked. "About tonight?" "Terrified." "Why?" "Because I've been dreaming about this since I was 16 years old. Since the first time I heard La Traviata and cried in my bedroom and didn't understand why. And now it's here. It's actually here, and I'm afraid it won't feel the way I imagined." He touched my face. That gesture, fingertips along my jaw, that had become our shorthand for everything we couldn't say. "It will feel better," he said, "because you imagined it alone, and you will not be alone tonight." We spent the day being tourists. The Pinacoteca di Brera, where we stood in front of a Caravaggio, and neither of us said anything for 5 minutes. The Galleria Vittorio Emanuele, with its glass ceiling and its mosaic floors and its shops selling things we couldn't afford and didn't want. A gelato place where Magnus ordered 3 scoops of pistachio, and I ordered 2 scoops of dark chocolate, and we sat on a bench in a park and ate in happy silence. At 5 o'clock we went back to the hotel to change. Magnus had bought a suit for the occasion. Navy blue slim cut, the kind of suit that made his shoulders look even broader, and his waist even narrower, and his entire body look like it had been designed by an architect. He was struggling with his tie. When I walked over and tied it for him, my fingers were shaking. "You're shaking," he said. "I know, Ethan, I know. I'm fine." He caught my hands, held them still. "This is going to be the most beautiful night of our lives," he said. "And if the soprano goes sharp on the high visi dart, I will still love you." I laughed. I kissed him. I straightened his tie. La Scala. I don't know how to describe it. I've been trying to find the words for months, and they keep falling short, like planes that can't quite reach altitude. But I'll try. The building itself is unassuming from the outside, a modest neoclassical facade on a busy street, nothing like the Gothic drama of the Duomo. You'd walk past it without a second glance if you didn't know what it was. But inside is a different world. The foyer was all marble and gold, and the kind of hushed elegance that makes you stand up straighter. People milled about in suits and dresses, speaking in Italian and French and German. holding programs, checking their phones, looking at each other with the shared excitement of people who are about to witness something extraordinary. We found our seats. They were in the upper balcony, not the best seats, not the worst. We could see the stage clearly, the orchestra pit below, the tiers of boxes rising around us like the inside of a jewel box. The ceiling was painted with something allegorical. Angels, clouds, instruments, and the chandelier was enormous, dripping crystal, catching the light and throwing it around the room in tiny fractured rainbows. Magnus reached for my hand. I let him take it. We sat there, in La Scala in Milan in Italy, two young men from different corners of the world, holding hands in the dark, waiting for the music to begin. The house lights dimmed, the audience hushed. The conductor appeared, a small man with wild hair and enormous hands, and the orchestra stirred. And there was that moment, that exquisite moment of anticipation, when the baton is raised and the silence is no longer silence but a held breath, a coiled spring, a universe about to expand. The baton fell and Tosca began. I can't tell you the notes. I can't tell you the technical details, the tempo choices, the vocal quality of the soprano, or the darkness of the baritone scarpia. I can tell you that the music entered my body through my feet, through the floor, through the seat, through the air itself. It was physical. It was tactile. It was a living thing that wrapped around me and squeezed, and I understood, finally, completely, in my bones, why people had been coming to this theater for 200 years. When Tosca sang Vissi Dart, I stopped breathing. The soprano stood alone on the stage, and the aria poured out of her like blood from a wound. I lived for art. I lived for love. I never harmed a living soul, and the theater was so silent I could hear the person 3 rows behind me crying. I was crying too. Of course I was. I'm the softest man in Texas, remember? But so was Magnus. I looked over at him, and his face was wet, and his eyes were fixed on the stage, and his hand was gripping mine so hard I thought my fingers might break. And I realized that this exact moment was why I had built all those planes. Not to fly, to arrive, to reach this place, this seat, this moment, this hand in mine. When the opera ended, when Tosca flung herself from the parapet and the orchestra crashed into silence and the audience erupted, Magnus and I sat still. We didn't stand, we didn't clap. We sat there, holding hands, while the world around us roared, and we let the silence between us hold everything we couldn't say. Eventually he turned to me. His eyes were red, his tie was crooked. There was a tear hanging from his jaw like a drop of rain on the edge of a wing. "Well," he whispered. "The soprano didn't go sharp," I whispered back. He laughed, that laugh, the cathedral laugh, in an actual cathedral of music. "I love you, Ethan Clark. I love you, Magnus Lindgren. Puccini or Verdi? Tonight, Puccini. Always and forever Puccini." He kissed me. Right there in La Scala in the upper balcony, while the audience stood and cheered and the chandelier blazed, and the ghosts of 2 centuries of music swirled around us like a warm golden wind. And I kissed him back, without flinching, without fear, without pulling away. We walked back to the hotel through the Milan streets at midnight. The air was cool and smelled like rain and espresso and old stone. Magnus had his arm around my shoulders. I had mine around his waist. We didn't speak for 3 blocks. Then Magnus said, "What do we do now?" "What do you mean?" "I mean after this, after Italy, after Tosca, after the most beautiful night of our lives. What do we do?" I thought about it. I thought about the field in Austin, and old Gary with his Mustang, and my garage with the planes hanging from the ceiling. I thought about Magnus's apartment, the cedar smell, the record player, the workbench where we built our dreams out of wood and glue and patience. "We go home," I said, "and we build more planes and we listen to more opera. And we argue about Verdi and Puccini until we're 80 years old and neither of us can remember who won. I win. Verdi wins. This is established. This is not established. This will never be established." He laughed and the sound echoed down the empty street, bouncing off the old buildings, climbing toward the sky. "And one more thing," I said. "What?" "We come back to La Scala, to the Palais Garnier, to wherever the music takes us. We follow it." Together he stopped walking. He turned to face me, there in the middle of a Milan side street under a sky full of stars I'd never seen from Texas. "Together," he said. Together. He pulled me close. I pressed my face against his chest and heard his heartbeat. The same heartbeat I'd heard that Valentine's night, when I cried into his shirt, and he held me like I was something worth holding. Steady, strong, calm, the most constant sound in my world. "You know," he said, his voice rumbling through his chest and into my ear, "when I left Tromsø, my mother asked me what I was looking for. I told her I was looking for the sun. But I think maybe I was looking for you. You found me. I found you." A pause, the city humming around us. A Vespa somewhere in the distance, a window closing, a church bell low and slow, marking the hour. "And you," he said. "What were you looking for?" In your garage with your planes and your Puccini? I thought about that 16-year-old boy crying alone in his room, not understanding why an Italian woman's voice could reach inside him and find something he'd hidden so deep he'd almost forgotten it was there. I was looking for someone who could hear what I hear, I said, when the music plays. Someone who understands that it isn't just sound, it's language. And I was looking for someone brave enough to translate it for me. And now I don't need a translator. I understand it myself because of you. He kissed the top of my head, the simplest gesture, the one that said everything. We walked back to the hotel through the old streets of Milan. Two men in suits with wrinkled ties and red eyes and full hearts, and somewhere behind us, in the theater, in the walls, in the stone that had soaked up 200 years of music, Tosca was still singing. She would always be singing, and we would always be listening. And that's where we'll leave Ethan and Magnus, for now. Before you go, I have a question for you. Did this touch you? Did it make you feel something? I want to know. Drop a comment and tell me, on a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate this story? Be honest. Your feedback means the world to me. And if you haven't already, don't forget to support the Simple Gay Love on Patreon, so we can keep bringing you stories like this one. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Until next time.
Enjoyed this story? Good. Because I have so much more to tell you, but those other ones I can't put out here. It's not for everyone. It's for those who really want to go deep. On my Patreon, the stories are more intense, more free, more real. No censorship, no filter, no limitations. It's the place where I can truly explore everything these characters live, feel, and desire. Things that don't make it out here. And trust me, there's a lot waiting for you. And it's not just content, it's a community. A closed space for those who want real representation, who want to support the LGBTQ+ cause and have access to benefits nobody else has. Early content, behind the scenes, stories only members get to know, and a group of people who think just like you. A place where we can talk about everything, without judgment, without limits. There are already a lot of people inside following stories you don't even know exist yet. And every month, there's something new coming. Getting in is easy. Point your phone camera at the QR code on screen right now, or use the link in the first pinned comment down below, or in the video description. In less than 2 minutes, you're already part of it. See you on the other side.